All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Conroe ISD Board Workshop. It's August 6th. The time is 5:06. We appreciate you all being present tonight. We'll open our board workshop with public comment. Per Board Policy BD, the Texas Government Code Section 551.007, any citizen who has signed up may address the board regarding tonight's posted agenda items. Ms. Godfrey, is anyone signed up? All right. We will now move then to item 2, which is receive information regarding the 2024 STAAR 3 through 8 and STAAR end of course results. Dr. Medford has been anxiously awaiting for a month to present this information as it was delayed by Hurricane Beryl, but she's here tonight to share some information with us. Even better.
How about?
There we go.
There we go. First test of this evening. Here we go. All right. It's good to see everybody. All right. So before I get started, just some things that I know all of you guys know, but just for everybody that's joining us watching, some things to consider as we talk through some of this data. I'm going to oversimplify something that's pretty complex, right? We talk about the state doing that a lot as when they assign letter grades, they take this really complex system and make it a letter grade. Well, I'm going to semi-do what we talk about them doing tonight because we've got lots of really complex things within this data, but for the sake of time and just our audience, we're going to kind of simplify it the best I can this evening. We have hundreds of amazing people, many of them behind me, that are doing the work of taking this data, really drilling it down all the way to the TEAC level, the student level, to really make it impactful for our kids. So we know probably many of them on campus as we speak still, right? Because that's what teachers do this time of year. Just a reminder also, it's a moment in time, right? We have lots of data pieces that come at us. This assessment, this one day for each content is just that moment in time. So we had, for example, this year, some places where power went out in the middle of them testing, or the Wi-Fi goes down, or maybe I didn't get the cereal I wanted that moment. We know there's all these variables, right, within the data. We also had the first year, you might have seen in the news, that we had AI grade the written responses, which we saw affect that. There were some news articles about like 5th grade, for example, had a really high rate of 0 scores. So lots of little nuances, right, as we look at some of this data. And remember, it's kind of apples to oranges. We're comparing last year's 3rd graders to this year's 3rd graders, which aren't the same kids. And then anytime you do really well, as we feel like we've done in the past, that regression to the mean is always a real thing, and you'll kind of see some of that as we talk through the data. But so proud of all of the work across the district that has happened, that goes into these scores, and then what's happening as a result of them as we move to this year. So excited to kind of talk through that. So where are we within like the world of data? So this is one piece of lots of data that we receive that help us kind of make goals and set things in motion for our school year. So this is one of a lot of them. You know, I'll come to you in early after winter break with our annual report where we really combine all of these pieces to one. So this is just one small little piece that we really, really look at as we're making and setting our goals for this year. So we talk about preliminary. Why is it called that? Sometimes it changes slightly. Some of the students are in this data that aren't in the accountability subset. That's what's going to be released August 15th. That could be they weren't here on what we call snapshot, or they were an emergent bilingual student who were within their first year. And then just this, as a reminder, this data is only spring 2024. So we don't have high school EOC that were tested in December or June, and then our STAAR alternate students are also not included. We also included for you our peer district average. So I know you'll be surprised to know that when I look at this data, I have to use a sports analogy. So when we think about a race, there was a moment in time that I felt like I was going to be a half marathon runner. I'd worked really hard. I ran here in Houston. I love the Woodlands Half Marathon. I'd been really training, and I'm like, I'm going to have fun. I'm going to go to Austin. That was a terrible idea because there are hills there, right? And so the reason why I use that example is I was still racing against a lot of the same people on my team, but because the terrain had changed, my time wasn't necessarily the same, right? But if I was racing against the same people, that gave me the gauge of, am I doing better or worse, right, when I'm looking at the same kind of team of people I'm competing against? So I use that analogy for these scores. So how are our peer districts doing in comparison to us when we're looking at how we did each year? It's kind of the only thing within this that remains the same are these districts. So as you know, that's who we compare ourselves to when we look at everything from STAAR scores to tax rate. So we look at peer average throughout the scores, and so we've averaged our tax rate compared to the average, and then the districts before us. I think it just kind of sets the tone for what we're able to do and how fiscally responsible we're able to do it. All right, so within each data set, you'll see did not meet grade level. Those are the students that weren't quite there. Then all of the other students will either be in, if that weren't in the do not meets category, will be in approaches. The students that scored a little bit higher level than that minimum standard are going to be called students meet grade level. And then the students pulled out of that scored at the highest level are indicated as masters. So just kind of made a little graphic to try to help. So we have the students that did not meet, and then all of the other students are the approaches kids. So those are the two numbers that we could add together to make the 100%. Sometimes it's kind of hard for us to wrap our head around the different names. Then we have the students that are meets. Those are the students within that approaches group that scored at that next highest level, which also includes our master's kids. And then the last set are those highest achieving kids get the designation of masters. All right, so all of that to kind of set us up for the first set of data here. So what we do when we look at this is we look for trends, anything that stands out so that we can start making plans. So what I kind of want to point out is we look at 3rd and 4th grade. So we look at how did we do compared to our peers. So you notice we saw a slight dip in approaches, and we saw the same thing across the board, whether it's state and our peers, but still achieving higher than our peer average. The other thing to kind of look at is the cohorts, right? In 2023, the 3rd graders were approaches at 84%. We saw that number move up to 85% this year's 4th graders. And you see the same thing with meets from 60 to 61. And then we saw that 5-point gain in masters, which is huge. So for every 1% gain, that's about 50 students. So a lot of students that our teachers were able to push into that highest category there. Then we look at 5th and 6th grade, kind of see the same trends there. Right there with our peer districts. You see that master's number jump up to 37. 6th grade is where you start to see that curriculum change. It's considered a secondary. The state 6 through 8 is a grade band. So we start to kind of separate and really move into that higher level thinking and analysis of text and reading. And our junior high students, again, we kind of see the same patterns. You start to really see those master's numbers increase above our peer districts, getting close to that 40%. And then these are our EOC students. So these are the 2 tests that are required as part of graduation. All right, so as we move into math, one of the things that there's been a lot of headlines about math scores over the last few months, really talking about that's where we've seen a lot of the gaps as we look at students from those COVID years, right? So the 3rd and 4th graders were in K1 during that time, just to kind of put the age range around them. So you can see where we are compared again, achieving higher than our peer groups. What we've really seen here, and kudos to Lauren and Jeff, our school improvement team, as well as teaching and learning. Everybody's worked super hard to kind of dig into what can we find that can help support district-wide, and really what we've seen is that computation skills, what we call math review, something that we do every day in our classrooms, kind of 10 minutes at the beginning of class where they really focus in on those operations, those skills where they really make sure they have that numeracy. And that's one of the things that we've kind of worked to reset this year. So that's kind of an example of what we do as a broad picture when we get pieces of data back at the district level. You see our scores jump pretty significantly up in 5th and 6th grade. 6th grade is not your 6th grade when we were in school, so that's really where we start those pre-algebra skills. We saw really significantly higher scores than our peer districts in that grade level, which is a testament to the work of all of the pre-K to 5th grade that we've been seeing, over the years, really working to push to make sure our students are ready to take that big jump. And all that hard work you're starting to see pay off. 7 and 8 is always a topic of conversation. This is where you kind of step back and you're like, whoa, what's the story here? Dr. Sickler and I have spent a lot of time talking about it. We've talked about it every year here because we know that in 7th grade is where we start to see kids skip that test, right? Our advanced kids don't take 7th grade STAAR for us. They go from 6th grade STAAR to 8th grade STAAR because that curriculum's compacted for them, right? And they start that accelerated math track. Well, we're 10 points below our peers. Of course, that was something that we noticed. But then you look at 8th grade, when you see it on the same page, you notice right away that we're 10 points ahead on the 8th grade score. So Dr. Sickler did some digging, and what we found out was some of our peer districts have their students do the opposite. They don't skip the 7th grade STAAR, they skip the 8th grade STAAR in that advanced track. So this slide is probably the hardest to truly compare. Obviously, we have some work to do in 7th grade math. Carlos in our teaching and learning department, our coordinator of secondary math, is really working with Dr. Sickler and his principals to continue this work. It's always been a goal of ours, but starting to kind of figure out that people handle this a little bit differently. The other thing is, this past year, the House bill was passed that it was required for any student that scored 40th percentile and higher to automatically be placed in accelerated math in 6th grade. We started that work a few years ago, so it'll be interesting to see over time as that kind of catches up and everybody's evened out in this assessment piece, kind of where we really land, right? So right now we're truly comparing apples to oranges here. I believe we had about 300 more students take 8th grade tests this year than last year, which means we're offering that advanced track to more and more students. So an area of us to keep watching. It kind of all evens out here in algebra. Everybody has to take algebra EOC to graduate. So we see the kind of numbers kind of even back out here. Then for science, 5th and 8th grade, and then we have biology EOC, so 3 exams for science. This was one of the first tests that Lauren and I talked about. Like, we saw the number, our eyes got really big. This is an example of that moment in time. Every year the test is different. In our opinion, the science exam this year was in Austin. It had a little bit of a hills to it. This was a test that we outperformed all of our peer districts in. So while not the score that we would like as far, because we know each of those percentages represents students, but when we take a step back and see how much higher we are achieving than the others, it kind of lets us know, like, take a minute, really analyze it, and we're doing well there. See the number kind of jump up in 8th grade. And then our biology students, very successful. This is also one of the 5 EOC exams. And then social studies, those are assessed in 2 grades, 8th grade, and then U.S. history. Our U.S. history students were very high achieving.
Killing it.
But again, you kind of look at it, comparison, and consistently well above the state average and above our peer averages. So a very quick 30,000-foot overview, but I'll take any questions or thoughts you have.
Anyone?
Could you go back to the very first slide that had the different definitions of meets, approaches?
Sure.
I think it was the first slide.
Is this one good, or you want this one?
This one.
Okay.
So and correct me if I'm wrong, because all my kids have taken this. Were there more percentages at one point, like a certain percentage meets, like you have to pass a certain percentage of the test to meet, to hit a certain category? Were there percentages that were in this listing in the past?
So, yes, I think I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
So basically the state sets passing standards, and in order to hit and get designated as a student that meets, the state
Yes.
sets that, and that it's different for every grade level and every test.
Okay.
So you're
And
correct.
Do those change over the years?
They
or
can,
are they
yes.
standard?
They can change.
And
I
how-
don't believe that did they change this year?
Some went up 1 or 2 questions, some went down 1 or 2.
Some went up 1 or 2, some went down 1 or 2, some stayed the same. That's very clear. It's very helpful.
Yes, thank
but
you
But
for
it's
that.
also a very, it's a very great point of, they set the scale score,
Okay.
right? Which is, this is where it gets difficult. And
Yeah.
then the percentage comes from there. But it
Okay.
changes. Some go up a little,
And-
some go down.
And do we always know, do we know the standard before they take the test?
No.
I just want to make that point. So they don't tell us what would get us to these points until after, then they create
Curve.
the number. So there's,
Oh.
like, you don't know, like, we don't know before test day to say, like, well, if you make an 88%, you're going to be masters. We don't know that. They don't
So
set
they
that.
score them first and then decide what percentages they're going to categorize it as?
Yes.
Oh,
We
Okay.
get close, right?
Yeah.
It's not, but
You can guess, but
We can
it
guess.
can move. And
Okay.
you don't.
okay.
So it's a constantly moving goalpost. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Sure.
Along that same lines when you were talking about it. So what was this year then, the percentage of, that would have, if you didn't reach a certain point, that would have been approaches grade level, meets grade level, each of those?
I don't have, because they're different for every grade level, every content. I can
Okay,
send you
I'm
that.
sorry.
We have it in a chart.
Okay.
I don't have it memorized. I apologize.
I'm noticing that in this description of the levels, that it says that under did not meet grade level, that the student is unlikely to succeed in the next grade without significant or ongoing academic intervention. Then the second thing is approaches grade level is likely to succeed in the next grade with targeted academic intervention. And then the third one, meets grade level, also states students have high likelihood of success in the next grade level, but are still going to need some attention, targeted information there. In the third grade reading scores, in the data that I'd asked for that you provided me, thank you very much, because I know I asked for quite a bit. We had 779 students that did not, out of 4,810 that did not meet and will unlikely be successful in the next grade level, which is about 16%. Then under the next one, approaches grade level, it says that likely to succeed in the next grade level or course with targeted intervention, but that's just likely to. There were 1,085 in that one. So that's another 23%, which is 30% of our students are not likely or lower than that to succeed in the next grade level. And so we've learned through science that if 30% of our students, if by third grade our students aren't reading and able to read, they're likely to struggle as readers for the rest of their lives. So 30% is a lot of students to leave behind. And I'm noticing, I should say, that's been consistent when I've looked at previous year STAAR preliminary results and then other information. It continues to be around that 30%. So I was curious to know what the state's levels are of acceptability or passing rate. So I'd really like that information. Just as a note, 30% in the third grade in RLA meet grade level and 30% meet masters. So that's 60% are at least performing at grade level. And sorry, there's people filing it and it distracted me, squirrel.
Say that number one more time.
60% are at meets grade level and or masters.
Correct, 58.
30-30 is what it is. So that means that we are approximately, I'm rounding numbers there, but approximately, I'm just very, very concerned about that 30 to 40% that may not be reading by the end of third grade. And I'd really like to know what the state puts, because I'm assuming if they're saying 40% on an algebra or on a math test can put them on the accelerated track, I'm curious to know what they consider acceptable in reading.
So just a couple things. So remember, this isn't reading level. So this is like a comprehension, reading, interpretation, right? So I understand what you're saying. And that's why when we make those accelerated intervention plans, we take all of that into consideration, right? Where's their reading level? What's their STAAR score? That kind of helps us Are they struggling in both? Do we need intervention in both? Is it more of the comprehension? Is it more of the length of the test? That's where, when we talked about the magic happening on campus, that's why that is super important. And then just to clarify the math, it's not 40th on a score, it's the percentile.
Okay, so 40th percentile.
Like the top 40th
Oh,
percentile.
okay,
of
okay,
students.
gotcha.
So it
Sorry.
could be at a campus,
So
you could have
that-
90% of the kids at one campus.
Then that definitely
that.
makes me want to know what they were, what their percentages are that Trustee Nelson was referring to on these levels for the different grade levels, because that makes my data another factor
Take
to
it
look
the
at.
next. It also, I can also send you, it's also online, that they've even released, like, when they choose a specific answer on the test, why they did that and what their rationale is. So
wow.
it gives, there's so much information, and again, it's one point in time, but it helps us kind of understand each specific thing.
And I wanted to thank you also, because part of the information I asked for wasn't an average of the peer schools or peer districts. I wanted to see us in comparison per each one, also to be able to look at their tax rate, which means they have more finances to offer, et cetera. And so that was one of the things. And we were consistently, we were, as I went through and did all those calculations, we were right there with Katy ISD and Cy-Fair on some of them. There were some school districts much lower, all the way across the board, so.
We just did an average to try to be.
Right, that's why I wanted to know.
Of course,
for
yeah.
each
That's
of them
why,
to see
that's
it.
why we shared it. It's
Yes,
lots of good
thank
information.
you.
Mhm,
Thank you.
of course.
All right, any further questions? Go ahead, Mr.
Yes,
Hubert.
sir, I do have just an observation. Well, first of all, the 30% that's been identified that Ms. Olenberg was talking about, I think the comment was leave behind. We're not leaving behind anybody. We're just identifying 30% need help and that they may not make it to the next year. So you put an emphasis on making sure that they do make it to the next year. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So on these, you had mentioned that it is sometimes difficult to compare, I don't know if the word is cohorts not, but the 2023 to 2024, because it is a different group of students, which makes sense. I understand that. So my question is, do we track the third grader this year who's moving to fourth grade and compare their third grade to fourth grade side by side, and then at them as fifth grade to see if these numbers change inside their own class? Do we track that information?
Absolutely, and we're actually graded on that by the state. That will be
Okay.
included in the A through F rating. That is part of the accountability system that we are. And even the students who are unsuccessful, they actually count twice in that calculation. We have to show that they've grown. They count, did you
Okay.
achieve for these kids? And then they count again. So high standard for us to continue to make sure they are a priority and are moving forward. Every one of the kids have to show that growth.
So is there the ability in future reports to maybe, I don't know if this makes sense, or in a workshop we're talking it out, see if it makes sense to what I'm asking, but is there a way to take the third graders in 2024 and then whenever they graduate to be able to compare where they were as third graders to where they were as graduates to see if those numbers changed much in that time period for the board to be able to see the progress?
Watch cohort. We track the
Yeah.
cohort. I can look to see if we can make it to
I
where
don't know
it's
if that makes
clean.
sense or not. But
No, I see what you're saying. Like, if were we able to move them forward?
Yes.
So, in our goal every time, it's in what the state grades us on as a piece. Remember, we talk about each of these are small pieces. Is
I understand that. I'm not talking about the
moving from
grading with the
meets-
state. I'm talking about as a district. How are
so
we doing?
approaches, moving those students to meets,
Yes.
moving them to masters, and then keeping them masters. We watch all of that. We can
Yep.
get an example
Yep.
cohort and see what we can track.
So one of the challenges long term is our mobility rate's pretty high.
Understood.
So when you from third grade to senior year,
Yeah.
and truthfully, if you only looked at the kids that stayed, our data will look super great. Because if they stay, like if they're in a stable home and stable and they're with us from third to 12th grade, we're going to knock it out of the
They're gonna
park.
knock
I'll
it out.
guarantee you.
Absolutely.
It's the mobility pieces where all of this gets really complicated, which is why, as Dr. Medford said, we oversimplify this and we start throwing these things into big numbers. But the reality of what happens with this is handled on an individual. Y'all have seen them when you go to schools, right? You go to some of these data rooms. It's individual child and beyond that, individual teaks with each child and skills. So I mean, it's so granular at the campus level. Here we have to, you know, combine them all together. But, you know, but absolutely what you're asking about is there are people on campus that are tracking not only overall performance, but individual skill performance across those grade levels for every individual child.
Awesome.
We can pull that up for every student. See, the other thing just to mention is, as we mentioned with the state grading, the TEKS also change or the assessment changes, right? So then sometimes that becomes even harder to, now we have writing in every grade level that the older students wouldn't have had. So when we track them across next year science, the test will adjust. So those are just some things to keep, but we absolutely do, and I think that's a great point.
One just really quick question. Are you finished? I'm sorry,
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
cutting you off. For the students that are just approaching or they're on the lower levels, it's important. We do offer sort of enrichment and things like that, correct?
We do
that help them
intervention.
get to the
Absolutely.
next level. I just think it's important that we mention that here.
And really,
so
we
folks
look at
understand
that. You can see it mentioned in here. You'll see the term intervention in every
Right.
box, really,
Awesome.
right? Because you could have a student with masters, maybe it's just
Yes.
geometry that pops up as they do really well in everything else. So that's why it
Right.
says or little intervention. They may still need a little bit because we've identified
Yes.
this one thing, but I think that's a great point. Thank you.
And the intervention is like they're pulling kids from classes to work specifically on these particular areas in the STAAR testing that they needed the help in.
Our goal is to meet them in their classroom so they miss as little instruction as possible. But yes, it is to look at those TEKS
Great.
that they need curriculum-wise. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
All right.
Okay, I wasn't implying, and I never used the words that left behind at all. I just was concerned that if we have 30%, and that's why I wanted to know those percentages, because if the state looks at it differently, I look at something out of 100%, you have 60% that are meeting or above, or beyond, and we have 30% or 40% that are below, or whatever the numbers are. 60% isn't, I mean, in my book, that was a failing in my grade book. So, you know, that's why I was trying to understand the apples to apples as equating it to the percentages of what the state is saying are these different things, was the first part. And the second part was, we know that in third grade, if they aren't reading and able to read, they will struggle for the rest of their lives, or they will never progress beyond it. So that's all I was trying to say.
But these
Sorry.
aren't reading scores. These are comprehension, there's a lot of into it, that's what you're saying. It's
I
not
wasn't
just- not just
referring to
reading.
reading levels, I'm referring to the ability to succeed in a grade level. That's all I was getting at. And
I
if the
gotcha.
state is stating that in our RLA standards of our numbers in third grade, if the score shows that 16% aren't passing, I'm just picking a number, or 23% aren't, then I'm just stating that I wanted to know what the state said. Maybe theirs isn't as 100%, because you just said, well, the 40th percentile, but anyway. But the point that I was getting at is I just wanted to know their percentages, because then to me, looking at it, 30% or 40% not in reading and language arts performing where the state thinks we should perform, that's a scary number to me. So
Yeah,
that's
and
why
I
I was
think-
asking.
Now, where are we getting these numbers from? Because the numbers are not indicative of what the report that I'm reading say.
I'm
Because
going
if
from the
you
numbers
add-
she gave me.
Explain that to me. Explain to me what help me articulate articulate what she's trying to communicate, because I'm not getting it.
I think, help make sure I articulate correctly. I think what she's pointing out is that meets are at 58%, almost 60, and she wants to make sure that we're really working on the 40% that aren't to meets.
See, that's what's so confusing. This is you can't say you subtract 100 from that and say, well, 40%, because if you got meets, what about masters? What about the masters in that percentage? So how you guys are taking a simple math and taking 100 and subtracting from 60 and getting 40, and saying 40% don't meet the number? Am I misinterpreting something? And then let's talk about fruition. If that is the case, then we're essentially saying that if that's the realization that we're faced with, then next year we should see 20-30% of them not pass.
Yeah, I think that
And
That's not.
the point is the definitions that Dr. Medford provided are from the state, and they're a qualitative assertion, you know. But they're basing this opinion on statewide, like this, you know, this is not an opinion just on us. This is on statewide. So when they look at this and they say, you know, an approaches grade level student is likely to succeed with this much intervention, that they're basing that on a statewide assessment. Well, when you look at our data, we're 10% higher than any ever on any test over statewide data. So what we do and what the state does is not always the same. So they're making a qualitative statement that may not be true. It's a basic statement to try to simplify it so that parents understand that where their children may be. But the reality for us that we see our children continue to matriculate through the system, and our graduation rate is 98%. So, you know, we're getting from 81% to 98% are graduating. So they are meeting grade because they have to pass the EOC to graduate. So they are meeting that in the end, and so that's, you know, you got to look in the moment, but then you know that's as far as you look at the long term. I guess that'd be the only example that I could give is when you get to the end of the road, we're walking 98% across the stage, and that's
Required.
So just to clarify for Trustee Williams, I followed up with some requests for extra data from Dr. Medford and received it. And it's pretty simple math that when you take the numbers of 4,810 third graders that took the RLA exam in Conroe ISD, 779 did not meet, but between that, and you have to do the math to remove it, there's 1,085 between extra. So it's 779 plus 1,085 equals the number of students that did not meet, or I have to look at the definition.
It's a 50.
I don't want to say the wrong things. Approaches grade level, did not meet, those two combined. So that's where that came from, Trustee Williams. Plus, under meets, not and above, because there's not a meets and above, but meets and masters, that was another total of 2,946. So that's how I was coming up with the numbers. It's right there, simple math. I just did the division and came up with the percentages. So that's why I was asking. Thank you, Dr. Medford.
Any further questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Can you go to our 12th grade scores?
The English 1 and 2?
We can start with English.
I can go whichever one. I just wasn't sure.
Okay, so to the point, when we're with regard to third grade, we're talking approaches meets. So are we saying that 65% of graduates meet? So that this definition still applies, that they would need intervention, or can I see that?
So in order to graduate, they need to meet the approaches standard to graduate. So English 1 and English 2 is one of the 5 EOCs required for graduation, and the state requires them to be approaches.
So to Dr. Knoll's point about what the state how they broad brush this, so to speak, we're saying 77% approaching. Those are graduates?
They are freshmen.
Yeah, that's a passing score.
So that's a passing score for that. They get credit for that EOC with that when they meet that level as a freshman, and then English 2 is their sophomore year. And
So
those
we
are
don't
the
have-
2 English tests required for graduation.
Do you have it broken out by grade in high school?
This is grade.
This is-
English 1 is 9th graders,
Okay.
and English 2 is 10th
Go
graders.
to English 4.
There isn't a test for
isn't?
English 3 or English
Where's
4.
senior level? Like what graduate level English?
They don't have, to graduate, you have to pass 5 EOC exams. English 1, English 2.
So to get to the number of our seniors that are graduating, what would we have to pull from this chart?
So those students, the 77% that passed the first time they took it, and the 79% that passed English 2 the first time they took it. The students that were not successful have an opportunity to retake. So when I mentioned at the beginning that it didn't include the summer scores or the December scores, those are students that retake it. So if they aren't successful, then they are given intervention and they retake it.
So with that 98%
Graduation
rate, how can we, I'm just asking, how can we take this data and apply it to how these these state level or these state defined levels apply to our graduates?
So they have to pass English 1 and English 2 EOC, or they have to go through an IEP, or they have a graduation committee, and there's certain requirements they have to meet. But these two exams, the school will work with them until they're successful on them, whether that's they'll take English 1 again as a sophomore. Some students need the course, some just need the exam. And we work with them to make sure that they get to that level so that they can be successful, which is why our rate is so high, because our campuses work so hard individually to meet them where they are, to make sure that they get to where they
Right.
need to be before graduation.
And I'm not yet at the high school level with my kids, so I would just like to be able to see like how this applies to our graduating class, like how these percentages and how these definitions, approaches meet and master
They have to retake it until they
approach.
And
Until
really,
they
in all reality,
approach
they don't.
to
They're
graduate.
two different things.
Well, in reality, if approach is a graduating score for English 1, so if our students that are approaching in our English 1 breakdown here, or English 2, if they graduate with that approaching score, that is our standard. So we're saying they
They've
are
met
likely to
standard.
succeed in the next grade or course with targeted academic intervention.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Approaching as a passing score. That's
And-
the state's standard for
Yeah.
passing.
Yeah, and as set by the state, like
Correct.
you said.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding where we're at.
I know, it's a lot. This is really, the 5 EOCs are where the rubber meets the road, right? They have to have them to graduate. And so
But they can pass them with an approaches, at
they
the
need,
approaches
the
level.
state says that's the standard
Yes.
in order to meet.
Approaching is passing.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any further questions? All right. Thank you, Dr. Medford. We appreciate your stick-to-itiveness on this presentation. So this will conclude our board workshop. The time is 5:43, and I'll hand it over to you, President Hubert.
All right, very good.
For the meeting.
Ms. Blakelock, you ready? Good. All right. I call this meeting of the Conroe Independent School District Board of Trustees to order. Let the record show that a quorum of members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551. The time is 5:43. Our first item of business is our invocation and our pledge. Our invocation will be led by Dayton Williams. Our pledge will be by Tiffany Nelson.
Join me in a word of prayer if you so choose. Heavenly Father, once again, we come in a prayer of thanksgiving and petition. We thank you for allowing us to be of service to our community. Father, we thank you for protecting our children and our staff during this summer break. Now, Father, we're petitioning you for strength, endurance, and patience for our teachers and administrators in this coming school year. Let them remain steadfast to their loving and teaching of your children. Father, grant our board and administration the wisdom and humility in our service. Lastly, let us be blessed with another safe and well-rounded education for our children in this coming school year, this new school year. Amen.
Please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
and the Texas flag.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you very much. Item 2 is our citizen participation. Do we have anybody signed up today? All right. Per board policy BED and Texas Government Code Section 551.007, any citizen who has signed up may address the board regarding tonight's posted agenda items. If a citizen has signed up to speak on this matter other than tonight's posted agenda, he or she is welcome to make comments to the board at the board's regular meeting, August 20th, when the board hears comments about both posted agenda items and non-agenda items. Each speaker will be given 2.5 minutes to present their comments to the board. Screens around the room will display the speaker's time. When the countdown reaches 0, the next speaker will be called. Ms. Godfrey, we call our first person. How many do we have tonight?
Just one.
So we can grant 3 minutes for your time.
Emily Doyle.
Good evening, President Hubert, members of the school board, and Dr. Knoll. My name is Emily Doyle, and I am the proud nurse caring for students at Snyder Elementary, and I'm excited to begin my 12th year as a CISD nurse. I would first like to express our sincere appreciation for the support the board has shown CISD nurses through different challenges over the years. With your support, we have demonstrated time and again that we can work together to achieve and overcome any issue for the sake and well-being of our students. Tonight, I'm here to speak to you on behalf of some of my fellow CISD nursing colleagues you see behind me regarding item number 4 on your agenda. You are going to be presented with some actions that you, the board, can consider in response to this potential new requirement you will hear about. The Texas Nursing Practice Act defines the legal scope of practice for professional registered nurses, and any deviation from this scope leads to disciplinary action from the State Board of Nursing, up to and including loss of nursing licensure. TAC Rule 225.15 states, in situations where a nurse's practice is governed by multiple laws and regulations that impose different requirements, the most restrictive requirement governs. Therefore, we nurses must always act within our scope of practice, regardless of what is stated in CISD's board policies or student handbooks. As we wait expectantly for clarification from the State Board of Nursing, please know that nurses are here to provide support in planning district implementation of guidance that supports both safety and equity for our students and professional nurse practice. District guidance should reflect practices that permit school nurses to practice within their scope and to adhere to the professional expectations of the Board of Nursing. Options for consideration may include delegation to non-licensed school personnel. While delegations of tests to unlicensed personnel can be part of school nursing when appropriate, it does not replace the professional nurse's duty to the patient. The nurse is still responsible for effective training and continued supervision of the designee and continuous monitoring of proficiency and implementation of best practices. We respectfully request that as we move forward, any consideration of delegation be in collaboration with experienced campus nurses. CISD nurses are strong, we're resilient, and we adapt. We work hard to ensure our students are safe and healthy so they can succeed in our schools. As I stated before, we're grateful for the tremendous support that we have received from the board in the past, and we look forward to continued collaboration. We appreciate your respect for our role, and we welcome the opportunity for a nurse panel if future discussion of this issue becomes necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, which is our consent agenda. I haven't heard from anybody to remove anything, so do we have a motion?
Motion accept as presented.
All right,
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by the uplifted hand. Any opposed by the same sign? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, item 4A, receive information and provide feedback regarding changes anticipated from the Texas Board of Nursing pertaining to medication administration guidelines by licensed nurses in the school setting.
All right, Mr. McCord is going to share this, and we'll get a little more background information. Thank you all for being here tonight. Our great nurses, we appreciate you being here.
So, President Hubert, members of the board, and Dr. Knoll, I come to you to present a topic with a long name and possibly a short presentation. We'll see. Just basically, in short, the Texas Board of Nursing is looking at changing possible requirements about what they impose on licensed nurses. And when I say licensed nurses within the district, that includes LVNs and RNs, about how they administer medicine to our students. So I'm going to forge ahead, and I just want to give you briefly just where we are. So we have received knowledge of a possible change coming down from the Board of Nursing. All we're doing at this time is just looking at possible options. We want to bring information to you tonight and just see how you feel, what your opinions are on it. And so we're just currently evaluating, currently doing what we always do, but I want to let you know just a little bit about the nursing personnel in the district. So you see at the top, you see an umbrella of everyone who works in the district is in some form for health services. I would tell you that our health services staff, they advocate for student health and academic success daily across Conroe ISD. And it seems like every time I come up here and I talk about something, whether it be from zoning to portables, I always talk about how things are connected. But the academic success of our kids is very much connected to their health and the jobs and the support that our nurses and support staff do every day to help those students be in class and be successful. So I would tell you that for many of our students and our families, the CISD nurse is the first line of healthcare that they have. And for many of them, it may be the only line. However, unbeknownst to most people, our nurses work hard to find community doctors and providers to get them assistance, whether what quadrant they come from across our whole 348 square miles. I would tell you too, we heard about Nurse Julie Wilkinson a few months ago, and how she saved the most precious thing we have, which was a young boy's life. It was a great story, and appreciate her, and glad that worked out positively, obviously. But what I would tell you is if you're a Board of Trustee member, or you're a superintendent, or if you're a principal, you constantly avert problems and disasters, and you don't get credit for it. But I would tell you, in addition to Nurse Julie, across all of our campuses each day, there are nurses that are working to solve problems and prevent escalations of medical situations, and people never hear about it. And those people toil and they work hard and they care about children, and they are true angels among us, and I appreciate them and wanted to say a special word of thanks. So for this presentation, before I forget it, I do want to note in the studio audience to my left and your right, two people that helped us put together this presentation. That's our Director of Nursing, Barbara Robertson, and also Dr. Mark Merle, our Executive Director of Operations. So without further ado, I'm going to forge ahead. So you can't really understand where we could potentially be going based on what the state is saying if we don't understand where we are right now. So I want to take a brief moment, and I don't want to be read the bullet on the PowerPoint presentation guy, but I am going to make a special note about bullet number 2. So right now, it's business as usual. Our staff are on campus nurses. They're meeting parents. They're meeting kids. They're taking in shot records. They're taking in medications, as we always do, and preparing for a great year to help parents, students, and staff. If you see bullet number 2, this is really important that I read this, because you have to understand this to understand where we could potentially be going based on what the state says. So right now, our operations for medications are based on what was put in place in 2006 by the Texas Board of Nursing. So what it says is a physician signed order is not required for administration of over-the-counter, OTC, or prescription medications by a licensed school nurse. So what I'm really talking about here tonight are licensed school nurses, RNs and LVNs, in Texas. So remember that the label is not an order. A lot of people visualize and they want the label to be an order, but it does not qualify as an order. So it's not required for administration of OTC or prescription medications by a licensed nurse. It does require parent permission, and we do that, and the label has to be current for us to administer medication as a licensed school nurse. So that's where we are now. So I don't know what for sure is going to come down. It appears from the that the Board of Nursing is going to say that nurses are going to have orders to be able to do it. They have put out an edict through the nurse organization. We're waiting to see. I want you to know, whatever happens, health services, just as it's happened in the past, whatever occurs, they'll be ready, we'll be ready, we'll make it work for our students and our staff and our parents. So having said that, where are we right now? So we're monitoring, I just mentioned that, the expected potential policy change that would require us to have a signed order and not just a label on the bottle. As a point of emphasis, I do want to make a point that this is not something initiated by us. All we're doing at this point is planning, trying to get ahead of it and know how we would react, especially since we are, at the end of the day, just basically a week away from the start of school. Some background that's really helpful is that FFAC, yes sir?
I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but just for clarity purposes, a signed order, say for instance my son has medication for asthma. There's a pump or something, old school.
Is your mic on, sir?
Just say for instance this kid has asthma, has one of those pump deals. They still use those? Okay, and it has the label on there that dictates when he needs to use it, if he has an asthma attack, whatever. So in addition to him having a current prescription, he has to have this doctor do what? Say that he's needs to or has to take it by?
Yes, and it has to be signed. It has to be a signed order. That's what we're trending towards, what it looks like now. Now, currently, even in our current state, for someone who was on asthma, we would effort and work to get that from the parent anyway. But to answer your question, going forward, it would have to be a signed order.
In order for him to have, just thinking out loud, making sure I understand that, because I've gone through this with my kids, and it's a pain, but I understand the need for it. If I have a prescription for something, the doctor had to have given me that prescription that says my son needs to take such and such twice a day or as needed or whatever. You're saying that, or this is potentially saying that not only he needs that, he's going to need the doctor to say he needs to do what he just said he needs to do per the prescription.
Correct.
Am I misunderstanding something?
No, you got it correct. Yes, sir, that's correct.
It takes geniuses to come up with this kind of stuff.
Well, it sounds like it's even more. You're talking about
It's redundant.
over-the-counter medications.
Over-the-counter
Tylenol.
medications also. Yes, sir, we're
Stuff like
trending
it,
there.
so
You're-
Correct. So it's the next level of that is, to your example, Mr. Williams, yes. So let's say you go to the doctor and your doctor electronically transmits the prescription order to your pharmacy.
Yes.
And you get your
Prescription.
you go pick it up. Yeah, that would not suffice. You also need a written or typed out order from the doctor that is signed by the doctor.
This is gonna
that would
be
have to
disaster.
accompany it.
Even if
But-
the prescription has your child's name on it.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
This is
But
going
then-
to be a disaster, man.
But
Well,
but if I can just to
Yeah.
then the next piece of this to Mr. Hubert's point is the over the counter, and that's correct. So if you are a parent and you let's say you wanted to leave Advil or something for your child who may
It's a headache.
has headache problems and just occasionally goes to the nurse to get Advil when they have a headache. Now our licensed nurses would have to have a doctor's order for that. Presently, parents saying give this to my child when they need it is adequate.
Yeah.
That is our current plan. This new plan would require a doctor's order for that to be allowed for them to
Here are the
administer.
unintended consequences of this. Parents don't want to keep going up to the schoolhouses. They don't have time to do that, especially parents with two household working parents, etc., working hourly jobs, etc. They don't have that time. And so if my kid is going to be having headaches or whatever the situation may be for a routine medication, now you're going to have kids going to school with a bunch of medication and self-medicating themselves based on their parents, as opposed to their parents going through what I deem to be the safe channel, going through the school nurse and saying, hey, give my kid this as needed. Now I got kids with Advils and Ziploc bags looking like M&Ms, you know?
They're not even allowed to do that, though.
They're not allowed.
That's what I'm saying.
However,
Well,
not
that's
allowed.
part of our conversation
That's
tonight as
correct.
well.
Yeah,
Yes.
where we're going.
Yeah.
But not allowed, but
You're
what
wise.
happens when they do?
so FFAC, legal and
Yeah.
local, is very
What
helpful.
happens?
But it also helps at this moment to understand that, okay, what we're talking about with these changes, it helped me, is specific to licensed nurses. Specific to licensed nurses. So, at the moment in Conroe ISD, campus medication administration policy allows designated personnel. So, what is a designated personnel? That could be a choir teacher going to TMEA in Austin. It could be an ag teacher. It could be a life skills teacher. It could be, in all likelihood, the clinic aide. It could be anyone who is trained. They're designated normally and trained by the registered nurse on the campus to administer prescription medications with a current prescription label. That's a big one. And over-the-counter medications. That's where we are right now as I stand before you.
What's the difference?
So,
Explain to me what's the difference. What's the difference in a nurse training somebody other than a nurse? I
Okay.
tell you what the difference is their license.
If I'm designated, well, you said, but if I'm designated, I don't have a license on the line. I'm just working to help parents get
But the
delivery
intent
of the
of the
medication
license,
to their
I
to their
digress.
children. So, yeah, so that's important to understand. So here's a slide. So what would this mean? So what would it mean for Texas families? Because this is not a Conroe ISD deal. This is a whole state deal.
sure.
So as Mr. Williams alluded to, it will potentially involve an extra step that would be necessary for parents and guardians to get signed physician's orders for both prescription and over-the-counter medications. It's worth noting for families without a current physician, which is not uncommon in our school district, to obtain the needed Board of Nursing requirements may require additional expense, time, and effort. Texas school nurses, including our nurses, could potentially face a difficult situation involving their licensure. And if you are a school nurse, licensure is everything. And the Texas Board of Nursing, they're not playing around at all. So that's a big one that would be something to mention. You know, it's also, it could potentially, depending upon which way we go, and we're going to show some options, just potential options. It could be an added burden for those designated campus personnel. I mean, it really could. Now, and this is one that I think is really important, is that one of the most valuable things we have are those minutes when a student is face-to-face with a teacher. Instructional minutes. Depending upon how this could potentially go, it could impact the ability of a family or a child to be in front of that teacher to receive instruction. And once that time has passed, it can never be recaptured. So really being in class, our nurses work hard and they collaborate with our parents to have children in the classroom with the teacher where we can instruct. So,
Mr. McCormick, what, like I hear everything you're saying, but what is bringing on this change? What has happened that has brought on this change?
We hypothesize, it's hard, we do not know for sure. Obviously something happened with the State Board of Nursing. I will tell you that there was an evaluation of a ruling back in 2006. It looks like that they're going back and taking a different approach or tack to the ruling they had in 2006, which is probably combined with an event that happened somewhere in the state, of which none of us are aware of what happened, that probably has beget this conversation and this rule coming down. What it is exactly, I don't know, but it dates back to 2006. Barbara, would you agree? There was 2006 is where it first started?
That is correct, in October of 2006.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
Oh, yeah.
And you're talking of the state, this isn't necessarily in schools, like something.
This is the
This is
state
the
board.
state,
Yeah.
Okay,
which
So
we're a
not
subset.
necessarily
there's
schools.
not been a
Yeah, that
new
here.
law passed. What this is a new interpretation of previous law. No new law has been passed. Barbara can help us
So
with
in
it.
October of 2006, the Texas Board of Nursing, they put out a bulletin every quarter. And they gave guidance to school nurses in that bulletin about the laws that pertain to medication administration by a school nurse, both for prescription and for over-the-counter. And that is on their public website. You can look at that from the Texas Board of Nursing. And so that is where hundreds of school nurses across the state of Texas have based their practice on how do we give medicine. And it has to do with the Texas Education Code, Chapter 22.052, which allows the building administrator to designate an employee. The Nurse Practice Act says that then the nurse's responsibility in that is that they provide the training, the documentation of that training, and the ongoing supervision. And if that person cannot do it, then the nurse is required to alert the building administrator that they cannot do that. Okay? And so that guidance was given in October of 2006. Now, fast forward to...
Oh, did you say the nurse couldn't do it? The nurse had to instruct if she couldn't do it, or the person that she trained couldn't do it?
No, so the nurse is able to do it based on
06.
October 2006.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're fast forwarding
And we're saying the nurse can't do it, he has
Now-
to train somebody to do it.
that potentially, our understanding is that the Texas School Nurse Organization did have conversations with the Texas Board of Nursing just last week, where they gave testimony basically about what could be the barriers to all of the school children in Texas if they changed that guidance. And our understanding from the TSNO website is that the Board of Nursing heard that, and they said they will be sending out information in the coming weeks that better explains the legal framework of why a registered nurse or a licensed vocational nurse is required to have a physician's order in order to administer medications, because that's true in every setting. The definition of a professional registered nurse or a licensed vocational nurse is that you administer medications that are prescribed by a physician. So when we want to clarify what's the difference between a prescription label and a physician's order, you think about your physician entered into electronic, or they wrote it on a piece of paper, scribbled, sometimes you can read it, sometimes you can't. They took it to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist read it the best they could, put it on the label, and you bring it to school. If there was a mistake at the pharmacy, which we know happens, the nurse is the last line of defense between the patient and harm. That's what our nurses do every day.
Agreed.
So the physician's order is directly from the physician that says that label should say 1 tablet or 2 tablets. That way there is not a mistake by the nurse about what is to be administered. So that's why a label, although in 2006 the Board of Nursing says you could use that, now it appears that they are going to be sending new guidance that says that that is not adequate because of the Nurse Practice Act. And so that's,
But I don't understand how that applies to the OTC.
I don't
Yeah.
understand that at all.
so over-the-counter medications, you as a parent can give anything to your child you want.
Okay.
But as a licensed nurse, I can't do those things. As a parent, I can do things to my child.
Sure.
But as a nurse, I can't do things to your child without a physician's order. So if you come up and give your child Tylenol, you absolutely can do that.
Yeah.
But if you come up and you give it to me as the licensed nurse, I have to follow the Nurse Practice Act that says I only administer medications and or treatments that are prescribed by a physician. And that is my understanding of where this new guidance is coming from, is that, as Nurse Doyle spoke earlier, there are 2 laws in the Nurse Practice Act that say that if there are competing or conflicting rules and regulations that govern a nurse's practice, then the nurse is bound to go by the most restrictive law. That is the Nurse Practice Act. So it does complicate things.
So let me understand what I just heard. We're basically saying there's exposure or risk associated with incompetence at the pharmacist, whom is the doctor as well, right? So the doctor is telling the pharmacist to fill this medication. The risk that the nurses have is that communication didn't happen the way it should have happened, and so that label isn't sufficient, right?
That is correct. You would see that in any setting where the nurse has a duty under the Nurse Practice Act 21711 to make sure that what they are giving is absolutely correct, that is prescribed by the physician.
So
I have
would
a
y'all
question.
prefer a physician send you the same thing he's sending the pharmacist, or give him a copy of that?
If they were to write it on a piece of, like we used to do, right? Then you write it on a piece of a pad, and they write a copy of that pad is the order, right? A copy of that, what they've written, and that it's signed, it's dated, it's
Like a
got,
prescription.
Johnny Doe, June 5th, 2024, has all of the information.
Now tell me what you want to do
And
here.
the doctor either signs it or stamps it, right? We used to get those piece of papers, right?
Okay.
Now it's all electronic.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
This is just hypothetical. If we had a nurse practitioner at our school, would we be under the same situation, or is this having to do with the levels of nursing?
Now it's all licensed.
So it's all licensed nurses, but the difference between an advanced practice nurse
Right.
is that then they are able to
Right.
diagnose, right? And
Correct.
prescribe.
Well, and they
So-
can write prescriptions, so is this like a writing, I mean,
Nurses
I'm
can
trying to
write
understand the distinction between the
As
two.
a registered
Since we're not a
nurse, I
clinic,
don't
they don't
have-
need to be governed by a doctor or a nurse practitioner, but they're acting as if we do. So that's why I'm,
Well, as an advanced practice nurse, I can only practice under a physician, right?
Right.
And so, but as a registered nurse, I don't have prescriptive authority. I don't
Right.
have diagnosing authority.
right.
So I follow
But we're
what
not
the
a clinic
physician-
anyway, we're not diagnosing kids when they come in.
We are not.
Right, so that doesn't make a lot of sense, but,
Have we,
That's kind of
sorry.
why we're here.
Well,
But the
Nothing we
irony
can
is,
do
and help me
here.
out, Barbara, the irony is if I'm designated and I'm trained,
You-
I can.
you can go wild with it. You just,
So it's ironic,
Because the Texas Education
That's what-
Code provides that.
and I'm not under the Nursing Practice Act.
You are
So-
not.
one other, like, I'm trying to think of how this could be a problem, because I'm hearing that there's no problem. Have we had
serious, man.
issues, and maybe this is have we had issues where people are like faking labels or something? I mean, it seems like there should be some reason why.
We have had issues where there have been labels that are altered.
Mm-hmm.
We have had issues where there was a mistake at the pharmacy.
Legitimate.
Okay.
And other districts also have faced the same issues.
Sure.
Many
Those-
districts have already required this physician's order for years, and we have based our practice on this 2006 to bring equity to our students, which is very, very important to a school nurse.
Yeah.
Um,
You-
But
you'll
it's also
circum-
very important to remain licensed and employed.
Yeah. Sure.
You'll
Okay.
mitigate some of those risks, but the overwhelming exposure that I see is kids not getting the medication they need because of a burden of a system that's been put in place that has seemingly no rational reason for doing so. As a CPA, if I go train somebody to do something and then they do it, and I'm doing that simply because I don't want to do it under my license, I got an ethics issue.
Yeah.
You know?
Our nurses are not choosing.
I'm not saying
No,
that.
no,
I'm
no.
just saying in general. I'm not putting this on the nurses. I'm just saying from a license, anything perspective, what we're trying to do is a workaround, essentially, the license, to get away from underneath the restrictions of the license. So you're taking your expertise under your license, training somebody without a license, and they have a little bit more leeway to administer a drug or medicine.
We have the luxury, if I use that word, in Conroe ISD, of having this problem. Our luxury is that we have clinic assistants, which is not really something that is popular out there, but our nurses need the support. We also have the luxury of having RNs in all of our campuses, because some school districts do not.
Agreed.
A school nurse is not mandated in the state of Texas. But we have that commitment to our parents that their student will have access to a licensed nurse during the day, a
Agreed.
registered nurse, to make sure of their health and safety. So in doing that, we have to follow the Nurse Practice Act.
So, once again, obviously,
We
super
understand.
complicated, right?
Yeah.
And we're not gonna solve it tonight.
understand.
We
I
don't need
do-
to, because
digress.
this is still a problem. We see it coming, but this is one of those things that it actually came to us like last Thursday. So as we started talking about this last Thursday, I said, well, we're meeting tonight, let's just put it on there, because you need to be aware, because if we have to make big changes, you're probably gonna hear from people, and didn't want you to be caught blindsided. We have started to look at what could be solutions, and this is not an exhaustive list of what solutions could be, but these are just some options that exist, and we'll let Chris, we've kind of broken them out between what we would call elementary pre-K to 6, and then our secondary 7 to 12, and
So,
Okay, before we
Please,
go
yeah.
on
Yeah,
that,
no,
I do
please.
have a question.
Okay.
Because I do want to hear, you worked hard on this, I do want to hear what you said, you and the team on it, but you said there's been no new law, no new regulation or anything that's come down, is that correct?
the Texas Board of Nursing has given
Yes.
word through the Texas School Nurses Organization.
Right.
This is coming, and it's coming for us, and they're rolling out over the next few weeks information on it.
Okay,
So-
but-
it is a new interpretation of old law.
Okay, it's just
There
an
is no new law.
interpretation of the law.
2006.
Okay,
Correct.
the Board of Nursing's interpretation of it?
Correct.
Because, it's a Board of Nursing book, on the Nursing Practice Act, is 76 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
And then and I'm just was wondering why we were becoming concerned with this, because I pulled it up and I was looking at this and I'm trying to figure it out, because it doesn't identify over-the-counter drugs in it unless it was prescribed by a doctor. And that's where my confusion is coming in, is that if the doctor prescribes the student to have itch cream or Advil or something, then there would have to be a written order for that over-the-counter drug. But if the doctor didn't prescribe it, then it doesn't have to have whatever the order is from the doctor.
Yeah, the challenge is, in this situation, whatever the Board of Nursing says is what these fine people have to follow. or they're subject to having their license exposed. Now, I have had communication with Senator Creighton's office about this because the Board of Nursing is governor appointed. It's a
Right.
political body, and expressed to them and shared with them information because I think that this has the potential of being a very big impact on all schools, not just us, everybody, and parents. I mean, we talk a lot about parent choice and giving parents, decision-making authority, and in a sense here we are on the OTC side, we're taking that away from parents because we're forcing them to the doctor a little bit.
I can almost see them requiring it as the precaution on regular prescription drugs and so forth. But on over-the-counter ones, that makes no sense to me, not to mention the absolute financial burden it would put on our lower socioeconomic base. Now you're going to say they have to see a doctor to be able to get itch cream or to get Advil, and that's just not going to happen. It's too financially overburdening on them, overbearing.
It's funny you mentioned that because they specifically mentioned anti-itch cream. No, they did. Yeah, they did.
I read it. I told you I read it.
Exactly.
So I read it somewhere.
Yes. So hey,
this
these
conversation, like you said, we're not going to be able to solve it all tonight. Is this something? This topic, is this something that would be suitable for the SHAC to also be involved in as well?
potentially, possibly.
Yeah.
So getting feedback, we put together some possible options, and like Dr. Noel mentioned, this is not an all-inclusive set of options. So this would be pre-K through 6, and there's nothing magic about pre-K through 6. We chose pre-K through 6 because lots of times over-the-counter medicine says keep out of the reach of children. So that's kind of why we went pre-K through 6. But in an ideal world, in the world that we want to live in, it would be number 1, and that all over-the-counter and prescription medications would be administered by a licensed nurse at school that had a required and signed physician's order. A second option on the continuum would be the same as number 1, and that all prescription medications would be administered by a licensed nurse at school with the required signed physician's order. However, all over-the-counter medications could be administered by designated school personnel. That would be another option. Now, even if you went with option 2, we would still strive and work toward option 1. We would want everything to have the orders, but option 2 is just something that's a possibility. And then option 3, going down the gamut, over-the-counter and prescription medications would be administered by designated school personnel. So, and then there's some, different parentheses there giving us a little more detail. That is the gamut, generally speaking. There's nothing magic that we've come up with for pre-K through 6.
So are you saying we as a district want to strive for option 1?
I'm saying in the perfect world, option 1 would be the best, because then you have a licensed professional nurse with orders giving all types of medication.
But no, that is not our recommendation. What we're saying is, if we had our choice, all students would receive their medical care from one of our licensed nurses, because we're fortunate to have them. That's what we would prefer.
Right, but it says with a signed physician.
Right, but if the only way they could do that if this new rule comes out is
Yes.
they'd have to have that signed form. But that may not be realistic in the real world. That's just that'd be the perfect scenario. And once again, there's scenario 1 is one extreme, scenario 3 is the other extreme. We have a 2 in the middle, but there's a continuum there, right? Some districts currently have policies in place that say, a prescription that is going to be needed for more than 15 days requires a doctor's order. A prescription that will be needed less for that doesn't require a doctor's order. That hits your normal antibiotics or whatever that may be. So there is a broad continuum that could happen here. We just try to hit a couple of the big pieces that it could be.
And Dr. Knowles, a point of emphasis, if we were on 2 or 3, we would be efforting to get to 1. That's what you would still be working and striving toward, even if you were on 2 and 3. This slide breaks down 7 through 12, and this is secondary schools in our school district. Number 1, the same as it was on a pre-K through 6, in that all over-the-counter medications given by the licensed school nurse. Number 2 is basically the same as it was you saw on pre-K through 6. Prescription medications potentially through a assigned physician's order through the nurse. Over-the-counter medications administered by designated school personnel. Option 3 on the continuum would be over-the-counter and prescription medications administered by designated school personnel. And once again, striving to get to 1. Now, number 4 is somewhat unique, and it kind of stands alone, but we included it. And so we have a neighboring school district that has allowed this for a decade. And when you first hear it, my eyebrow went up kind of like Spock in Star Trek, because I watched a lot of Star Trek as a kid because there wasn't anything else on television where I grew up besides Gilligan's Island. But you see, parents and guardians may choose to allow their children to carry and self-administer age-appropriate, FDA-approved over-the-counter medications, 7 through 12. And that could stand alone. Even if nothing changed from what we do, we could adopt 4, or 4 would work nicely with bullet number 2 if you wanted to marry those 2 together. So that is where we have come up on the continuum of options.
So this 4 is what I'd like for us to talk about, because 4 could happen regardless. And I will tell you that when they called me on the phone on Friday and they shared this with me and told me about the other district that does it, my immediate response was no. And then 5 minutes later, I was like, you know what? Like, we're naive if we don't think they're already doing that. 1. 2, it would take a significant burden off of choir directors and drill team directors and band directors, all these folks that are traveling. You know, we all have had kids in different activities. You know, my daughter was in drill team, and I can remember, you know, going to drill team camp. You'd have to go early and sign in the Advil bottle because you knew she was going to be sore. And I would have felt very comfortable with giving my daughter permission to do that herself. She was capable of that. We could extend that option to all parents, grade 7 through 12, but still they would have the option. If they don't feel like their child is mature enough to handle that, we could still handle it for them. But we could give them this option. We have shared this option with all junior high and high school principals, and they were comfortable with it. They felt okay, and
But we need to wait till they come out with a ruling before.
Well, but this could happen one way or the other. I think this is an interesting conversation. Even if they don't even change their ruling, I think it could be an interesting conversation for us to have here.
Number 4.
Number 4. 4 only, because even if we don't change anything else, we could change 4 and say, you know what, we want to allow junior and high school kids to do this because we think they're capable. If their parents think they're capable, we would support the parents in that decision.
What designation does an athletic trainer have from 7 through 12? Are they nurses? Are they?
No, so they are not governed by the Board of Nursing. So it's a different licensure. Okay. So they are a designee that can, and so in the athletic world, there is a route for kids to go.
Okay.
But non-athletes don't have that route.
Right.
So I would just be curious to hear your feedback.
I like 4. I mean, I would give my kids, I would be comfortable with all of my kids. I would have been comfortable with all my kids medicating themselves if need be. I mean, it's 7 through 12th grade. If I'm trusting them around medication in general, I should be able to trust them to take it to school.
Well, look, I don't know about that as well. I would like to me, that seems like something that would go to the SHAC. We'd ask the SHAC to look into that and make us a recommendation, a suggestion for us. That's my opinion for number 4.
So
I think that there might need to be a list of which specific over-the-counter medications, because a 7th grader with like some sort of spray or something like that, like a pain spray or something, I could see them being like, would you say, just getting a little cheeky with it.
Yeah, and in any of these, like, it would be very clear that it's still a violation of the rules to give it to anyone else, spray anybody. Like, that would absolutely still be against the rules.
Yeah.
It would just be, so, and all those things can still happen today and do.
And then we're putting a whole other level of,
right.
People watching that and disciplining that, and so that's a whole other level of oversight too.
the feedback we got from our neighbors is that it's a non-issue. But I don't know. We've never done it, so I've never lived in a world that we did it, so I can't guarantee you that it would be a non-issue. I can just tell you from their experience, that's what they told us. But
I would be comfortable.
I don't know.
So, Mr. McCord, do we know when a decision will be released?
They said a few weeks. So
From Thursday?
A few from last week. So a few for me is usually 3.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. We will probably already be in the process of having played school by the time we get the information. We just want to get ahead of it and just, hey, get this to you and let you start thinking about it. And we don't have to do anything at this moment.
Okay.
Really what we do in health services, it is so symbolic of what we do as a district, and that we try to follow the rules, we try to keep kids safe, and we try to help parents. And our medication policy is that in a microcosm, and we continue to do that. So with this coming down, it could impact it, and so it's made us start thinking, and Barbara and Mark and I, we tried to present this information in the most logical, understandable way we could, and I hope we were somewhat successful.
Yes, thank you very much.
Great job.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, item 5, which is legal A. Consider,
One question left on that. I am so sorry, Trustee Hubert. You said you reached out to Senator Creighton. Is there, like, would it be advantageous for parents to reach out to some organization, board,
Yeah.
whatever?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we're at a point, what I don't want to do is
And I don't mean Creighton. I
Right,
mean
yeah.
somewhere else.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, potentially, I think at this point, we shared the information with his office because certainly it's going to impact schools all over the state, which, him being the chair, that it's going to have a large impact. I don't know if now is the time to do that. I
Okay.
think for you all, for you all to have conversations, because I do think there is a potential for a political solution here, because that board is governor appointed, and so conversations can happen, and maybe.
And that was one of my
and, yeah,
reasons for
and maybe,
saying that.
And maybe a ruling. I mean, the ruling has not come out, and just because they've said that they're going to have a ruling doesn't mean they're going to have that same feeling next week. They might decide they're not going to have a ruling.
Well, if the
And-
right pressure was applied, that was my point, why I was asking.
Exactly. Fair enough.
okay. Thank you. All right. Consider and approve the joint election agreement with Montgomery County and adopt all county early voting dates, times, and locations, as well as election day polling locations for the November 5th, 2024 CISD Trustee General Election.
Thank you, President Hubert. It's that time of year again where we get to approve these 3 agreements. The first one is the joint election agreement. This is required by law that we participate with other governmental entities. It's a cost-saving idea behind it, and so that's what this first item is to ask that you approve the agreement that we can participate in the joint election for the November 5th trustee race.
Okay. Do we have a motion to accept?
So move.
A motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion, questions, thoughts? All right.
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're not to the point. How many, I'm sorry. Give me a second. I think I'm premature on that. Yeah, I'm good.
You okay? All right. All those in favor of the motion show by the uplifted hand. Any opposed by the same sign? All right, motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, next item is the election services agreement. This is our district's contract with the elections administrator for Montgomery County, Susie Harvey, to conduct the district's election. Over the years, the district, before my time, did its own elections, conducted them, but it's become more rule intensive, and the equipment is expensive, and so this is the most cost efficient way to conduct an election, to be sure that we comply with all the rules and regulations associated with elections. So we'd ask that you approve the election services agreement with Montgomery County.
Very good. Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Make a motion, yes.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion show by the uplifted hand. Any opposed by the same sign? Motion carries. Thank you. And then consider and approve order and notice of the November 5th, 2024 Board of Trustee General Election Position 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Thank you, President Huber. Now that we have the tools to have an election, we would ask that you approve the order and notice allowing us to conduct that election. It too, the contents of this document are statutorily required and it meets the requirements. And so I would ask that you approve the order and notice.
Okay.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Any discussion?
No.
All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion show by uplifted hand. Any opposed by the same sign?
Thank
All right,
you very
motion
much.
carries. Thank you. All right, no executive session today, unless.
Correct. That's correct.
Unless you want to make this longer, it's
No,
fine.
sir.
All right, do we have a motion to adjourn this meeting? We have nobody go anywhere, but
One more portion.
do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
So moved. All right, we are adjourned.
All right, at this time, we will commence our Conroe ISD budget and tax rate hearing. The time is 6:32. So once again, tonight is,
Dr. Noel, how long, should we take a little break or?
it's pretty short.
Okay,
Yeah,
very
it's
good.
pretty quick. This will be, for our trustees, this will be information that you've seen now 6 or 7 times, but tonight is an opportunity for Ms. Garza to present directly to the public this information. And at the conclusion of Ms. Garza's presentation, there will be an opportunity for members of the public that would like to make comment to come forward and make comment. At the conclusion of public comment, that will be the conclusion of this hearing tonight. So Mrs. Karen Garza, our Chief Financial Officer.
All right, well, good evening, members of the community. It's my pleasure to be here this evening to present preliminary information on the 2024-2025 budget. So here's our timeline. We have met multiple times in various formats, twice in a workshop format earlier this spring to share information on the budget. We met for an update at the July board meeting for another update, and then July 25th we did receive our certified estimate property values from the appraisal district. That did allow us to submit that information to the Texas Education Agency for them to finalize our tax rate calculation, which then allowed us to finalize our revenue projections. We do anticipate getting final certified values in the next week or so. However, that will not change the tax rate we are proposing the board adopt at the August board meeting, because those calculations are finalized based on that certified estimate value. On July 31st, we met with the district level planning and decision-making committee and shared the budget information with them, seeking for their recommendation to the board for approval at the August board meeting. Tonight is the first of 2 public hearings. We will have another public hearing at the regular board meeting in August, and then we will ask the board to consider adoption of the budget and the tax rate at that meeting. So here are our budget assumptions. Not a lot has changed here. We're still using enrollment growth. Our enrollment of 74,000 students, that represents growth of about 1,500 students from where we ended 23-24. Our average daily attendance percentage is 92.5%. As I stated earlier, we did receive our certified estimate values from the appraisal district. They came in at 8.25%. That represents roughly $4.2 billion in additional value for the district. That resulted in a proposed tax rate of 0.9496. That is 1.25 cents lower on the overall tax rate. So taking a look at the tax rate in the various components of the tax rate, on the maintenance and operations side, we are looking at a decrease in that tax rate of 3.25 cents. That is a result of continued compression by the state as a result of House Bill 3. On the debt service side, we will be moving from 26 cents to 28 cents as a result of the passage of the 2023 bond. So like I stated earlier, an overall decrease in the tax rate of 1.25 cents. So this is great news for our community. As the time of the bond, we were at 0.9621. With the passage of the bond, our community approved a tax rate of 0.9821. And we will be proposing to the board to adopt a tax rate of 0.9496. So this is essentially a decrease of 3.25 cents over what the community approved when they passed the bond. So we're fortunate to be able to offer a tax rate decrease to our community and at the same time be able to continue with the important projects that are going on with the 2023 bond. This is just a graph format of our tax rate from 2021. Our rate has gone down 26.29 cents. And this is a result of continued compression by the state. So looking at our funding estimate, this is the revenue side of the budget. We are proposing an estimated funding increase of $27.3 million. On our local property revenue, we are actually looking at a decrease of $14.35 million. That is a result of the implementation of Senate Bill 12, which is the recalculation of the over 65 tax ceiling for our over 65 residents. That resulted in a loss of local revenue of roughly $25 million, and then that was offset by our normal property growth, additional revenue. And then on the state side, the state is holding us harmless for that $25 million in loss of local revenue. So that $38.9 million of state funding is made up of the hold harmless for the Senate Bill 12 and then our normal student growth number. And the next two items are pass-through items. There will be an offsetting expenditure item for these when we get to the expenditure side of the budget. Our teacher incentive allotment program continues to grow, $1 million for that program, and then our normal TRS in-kind entry. So total revenue increase of $27.3 million. So looking at our personnel additions for 24-25, we are recommending an additional 147 employees in the general fund at a cost of $10.8 million. I do have special ed displayed separately here just to show the impact that it has had on our staffing for next year. Over half of that $10.8 million is for special education positions. We have seen tremendous growth in this area, and we do anticipate that continued going into next year. So now moving to the expenditure side of the budget, additional personnel for growth that we just looked at, $10.8 million. Our teacher step adjustment, this is just to ensure that we have a functioning teacher hiring schedule of $1.6 million. Other expenses for utilities, fuel, insurance, appraisal district fees, and supplies at $2.55 million. And then this is the offset to the two pass-through items, teacher incentive allotment and TRS in kind, for total estimated expenditure increase of $17.7 million. So putting this all together, our proposed budget for 24-25, beginning revenue of $672.77 million, revenue increase of 27.3 brings our total revenue to $700.07 million. On the expenditure side, our beginning amended expenditure budget of $694.27 million. Our expenditure increase of $17.7 million brings total expenditures to $711.97 million, bringing us to an estimated budget shortfall of $11.9 million. So this is just our budget by major object. Obviously payroll, the largest portion of our budget at almost 89%, $633.3 million of the budget is payroll. Contracted services at 4.97%, the largest item in there is our utilities. Supplies and materials at 3.99, the largest item in there is fuel for our buses. And then equipment and other at 2.09, the largest item in there is our property insurance. So total proposed budget for 24-25 of $711,969,241. So what's next? We will hold our second public hearing on August 20th, and then after that, at the regular board meeting, we will ask the board to consider adoption of the budget and the tax rate.
Thank you, Mrs. Garza. At this time, we'll have an opportunity for any members of the public that would like to make a comment to come forward. Okay, seeing no movement, that will conclude our budget hearing. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening.
Thank you.